I don't really know how many cattle cars were there, but there were more than 2. I really don't know.
And what are you told to do?
We are being pushed in now by the Germans. Now 2 stand in front of each open
The doors of the car.
doors. Several walk between us. Schnell, schnell, mach schnell. Yep. That's the first time I see a German uniform. I don't know whether it was Wehrmacht. I think it was SS. And they push, and they push, and they push.
Are you numb or are you frightened?
I'm more numb than frightened. I'm more numb than frightened. I don't know. Why? What? Somebody, the word passes that somebody asked a gendarme, where are you taking us? So the guy says, Kenyérmező. It's a place in Western Hungary, near the Danube, in the west. And Kenyérmező in translation means field of bread. Okay? That was the first lie that still sticks in my throat. Kenyérmező. So, you know, there is a sigh of kind of a relief. So they are taking us to Kenyérmező. Why is it called Kenyérmező? Field of bread. There must be some bread there. So it won't be long, because I just heard last night the booms from across the mountain, the Russian tanks or whatever they were shooting. I do remember one thing. I must have been frightened, but because when I was pushed in, and I must have been the last person to be pushed in, I imagine, because I heard the clank of the doors. And I think I fainted.
How many people do you think were in the cattle car?
About 100.
100.
Terrible. Terrible. The first day, we are very squeezed, and there are 2 buckets for hygienic purposes, and there is a great deal of modesty about it. When somebody goes, somebody else covers, etc. And there are still, and it's very, very crowded. Very crowded. Little Aniko and Rosie, my sister-in-law, and my mother, we sit on the floor on top of each other. Brother and sister said goodbye to each other. I was very moved. I still, what? Why? Where are we? It must be a nightmare, worse than a nightmare. From a nightmare you wake up. The train would stop intermittently, sometimes at night, to get water, to whatever they needed, coals or whatever, fuel. Thirst began to be atrocious. Everybody was thirsty. I remember a lady was sitting, Mrs. Preminger, I remember that, was sitting on a sack of nuts. Nuts, which she must have given to people, and you know what happens. And this is now daylight. Somehow they bring, and I was the smallest there, they bring it closer to the window, and we can see there are people on the train, on the train platform, standing with cans of water, cans of milk, some apples, all right? So my mother says, try to get the sack from Mrs., because I cannot reach it, get from Mrs. Preminger, get on it, and see if somebody will give us something. I get on the sack, on the sack, and there is that window. It's about this big. You've seen them. And I say in Hungarian, they were Hungarian with the Hungarian babushkas, please, can we have some water?
Say it in Hungarian.
Kérem, kaphatunk egy kis vizet? Can we have a little water? She says, yes, persze, of course. Mit adsz érte? What are you going to give me for it? I turn back to my mother and I tell her she wants something. So I said, Mit akarsz? What do you want? Egy gyűrűt, pénzt, amit akarsz. Kell adjál valamit. A ring, money, you have to give something for the water. So I turned to my mother. I said, Mom, she wants something. Gyűrű. So my mother reaches in her, because by that time, I forgot to tell you, that jewelry pieces were sewn in the lining, all right? And there was plenty. She gives me a ring. Let's try it. It's a little diamond ring. So I show it to her, and I say, fogok ezért kapni egy kancsó vizet? Will I get for this a can of water? She says, igen, here it is. And he says, add ide, give it to me. I give it to her, and she gives it to me, and as I reach, because that's why they put me there, I had a small hand, as I reach to pick it up, an SS was watching it all along, and at that moment, there he was, and he just smashed the can. I was almost holding it by its handle, and that was it.
It's hard for me to imagine how one spends one day in this car, let alone 3. Where's your hope now?
There is no hope. You cannot even think of hope. You haven't eaten. The thing which is absolutely more devastating than hunger is thirst. I didn't have those nuts of Mrs. Preminger, but I'm sure many people did.
Salty.
Salty. And you know, and some people died.
In the car?
In the car, oh yes. And whatever hygiene there was didn't exist anymore. You know? It was, I don't have the words for it. I don't have the words for it. Then one night, that was soon before we just arrived, one night a Mr. Weinfeld, who originally came from Poland, he says this, he starts to scream. Jeden Gewalt. Jews, how should I translate Gewalt?
Gewalt is Gewalt.
Gewalt. Jews, Gewalt.
It's the
That's
end,
right.
it's the worst.
It's the worst. And all this time we think we are going to Kenyermező, you see? And he starts screaming, Jeden Gewalt, Gewalt, Gewalt. So finally asks him, you know, they try to, what's the matter, Mr. Weinfeld? He says, Wir gehen nicht, we are not going to Kenyermező, we are going to, how do you say Poland in Yiddish? To Pointland, Polnish. We are going to Poland, he says in Yiddish. Are you crazy? We are going to Kenyermező. He says, I smell the air. These are the Tatra Mountains. Sure, we crossed the Tatra Mountains. Says, Gewalt. That I remember.
Are people silent?
No.
Are they crying?
They are crying. Some are praying. Yes, some are praying. And I just sit, stand. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty.
Are you in pain?
Physically, no. No, you know, I cannot imagine myself being there. You know, in looking at that girl today, how could she have done it? How was it possible that she didn't go mad? How is that possible?
Did you speak to your mother?
No.
Basically, you're in this car 3 days. You don't speak to your mother.
Oh, I speak,
Basically.
but not about, you know, Mommy, what did we do? Why? She takes my hand sometimes in her hands and, you know, she pats me. Sometimes she holds me.
I want to ask you a very hard question.
Ask.
It applies to the train, it applies to Auschwitz. You know, the instinct to protect a child especially in a mother, is so overwhelming. Is that instinct killed in this situation?
No.
Does your mother still want to protect you?
Yes. She was trying to protect me while I was standing in the line of 5 on the platform, and Mengele was coming towards us.
This is when you get to Auschwitz.
Yes. It was a very painful but a very good question. I'm glad you asked it.
The train arrives.
The train arrives. It's night. It arrived at night. We have no idea where we are.
Do you know the word Auschwitz at that time?
No way.
You've never heard the name?
Never heard the name. The Hungarian jury was not part of it until Eichmann, the Germans, walked in, until 1944.
The war is almost over.
Oh, that's it. That's what makes me so angry. They couldn't bomb, the Allies couldn't bomb. Now they are beginning to admit it and recognize it, and I wrote many letters and many things to many writers. Now they recognize this. Yes, they could have. First they tried to say that's impossible because we couldn't fill up. There wasn't enough gas.
There were many reasons. They're irrelevant. The bottom line is...
They could have, because they did. It turns out that when we saw those planes, which were Allied planes, they bombed Monowitz, which is a couple of kilometers from Auschwitz. It was a rubber factory. That they bombed.
Tell me, you get to Auschwitz, you have no idea what it is.
No.
The doors open, and what? What do you see?
It's dark. We just hear I hear two things. Barking dogs and screams. Raus, raus, raus. Schnell, raus. Then there are some lights. Finally, we get to the point where there is, I see an illuminated big square with enormous, what kind of lights do you call it?
Searchlights.
Searchlights. And I see that these people who yell at us, schnell, schnell, were very peculiar striped things. Okay?
Isn't this surreal for you?
Yes, that's right. This is not the world. I must be on another planet. Who are these people? I see numbers, and I see somewhere a red triangle, and they are mostly men. I don't remember seeing women. That's right. It was the commando that helped. And they say, don't take anything along. Don't take anything along. Don't take anything along. You'll get everything you'll need.
Are you petrified?
Of course I'm petrified. Of course I'm petrified. And they get us into this big square where, firstly, they separate men from women. There were not, my father wasn't with us. He happened to be taken in the last transport from Siget, from the prison. So now, again, we are set up in rows of 5, and Aniko is clinging to me. Babita, I'm hungry. Oh, I can't even talk about that. This is how we are. My mother, I, Aniko, my sister-in-law. No, she holds on to Aniko. She's not counted as a person, and somebody else at the other end of the line. And we don't know what's happening. We don't know that selection. We don't know anything. So, speaking of a mother's instinct, I was wearing a light raincoat. Not because it was raining, but you say what you can. And my mother turns to me and says to me in Hungarian, Babuka, tedd fel a kendőt. Barbara, Baba, put on your kerchief. I said, why? You know, I reached for the kerchief, and I said, Mommy, why? He said, nem akarom, hogy lássák, hogy milyen egy szép kis zsemle vagy. I don't want them to see that you are like a fresh bun. Was that protecting me?
Yes.
but it didn't help anyway.
What happened?
What happened was that when this very handsome SS, with a crop in his hand, strange eyes, they go like a metronome, looks us over, one by one, says, now, I have my hand like this around my mother's shoulder, because I have her kerchief on. And he looks at my mother, he looks at me, and says, Mutter und Tochter, mother and daughter. And my mother, being a very honest person, says, yeah. For years, this hand used to get numb. For years. It doesn't anymore. Doesn't anymore. Now I am all alone. Aniko.
Did they take your mother away?
Yes. He split us with that whip. He wasn't sure whether, because my mother wasn't that old. She was about, I don't know, 45, 47, something like that. Then they drag Rosie and Aniko. And Aniko screams, Babita, Babita, gyere velünk, come with us. At this point, there is another SS there who pushes me in another row. And I look around, and they are all young girls. I don't know anybody. And now, fear takes over. I'm all alone. I'm all alone. And I see, this is almost not more than surreal. I don't have the words for it. I see a German soldier, an SS, because they were all SS there. And I must have been crying. And he says, was is lost? What's the matter with you? I said, please, they took my mother away. And they took my niece away, and I'm all alone, and I don't know what's going on. So this is what he says. Ach, Fräulein, very polite. Don't worry. Your Mutti and your little niece and the young mothers are being put in special trucks, taken to a nice place. They cannot walk as fast as you will have to walk. Don't worry. You know, I was actually grateful to him. My first thought was, thank God, my mother is not going to have to walk with her varicose veins. And then the night began after that. When they stripped, when I say stripped me, stripped everybody else naked. By this time, everything was taken away. By the way, I also had some jewelry sewn in my, as I said, in my shoulder pads. And while they marched us from that Platz, the main square, into the bath place, where they took the rest of us, they completely undressed us, shaved pubic hair, everything.
Who did?
Prisoners, but under the supervision of the Aufseherins they were walking and they were doing the clipping, everything. That was before. Okay, I'll get there.
Women were separate here?
Beg your pardon?
Women were separate here?
Yes, by this time the men... And
the people who were shaving you, women?
Yes, yes. They were old-timers, as I found out. And but they were supervised by SS women walking back and forth.
Do you remember that experience?
I do remember it because it was a crucial experience to me, which I will never forget for as long as I live.
What does it do to a soul?
Oh, It doesn't do right then, but it does a lot later. Right then, you just don't know, don't know. You cannot think. By this time, I'm completely naked, shaven, shorn, and I clutch to my breasts. I clutch a little green book, and I clutch it, and an Aufseherin goes by and says, "Was ist das?" I show her my baccalaureate diploma. She takes it and she throws it on a pile of filth, of God knows what else, and I begin to cry. And she walks away. I am shaking. I'm shaking. And it was just a piece of paper, my baccalaureate. An elderly woman, that's how I remember her. She was less than half my age, I assure you, but to me she was an elderly woman, comes to me and very gently, and I was crying for everything. I suppose that's when that was the last thing, the seminal thing that really made me understand that something is abnormal. She comes to me and she says, "Gyermekem, my child, why are you crying?" And I tell her, "They took away my diploma, my baccalaureate." She says, "Don't cry, child. That they can take away, but what you have in your head, they cannot take away." I'll never forget it. It didn't really help, but in looking back, it helped. It was the right thing to do. And
this is still the first night in
The
Auschwitz.
first night.
You're now naked, shaved, in a room of other
That's right. Naked, shaven women.
What happens next?
First of all, we look at each other and we see each other and we laugh because we look bizarre, you know? And sometimes laughter relieves the anxiety. We still don't know where we are. Eventually, we are taken to another place and the tattooing begins. They grab your arm, they have a pen. I've never seen it since, and I don't want to ever see it again. And they put a number in. You want to see it?
Yes.
Sorry. I'll die with it. I would never remove it.
There. What's the number?
A7556.
You become
A7556.
A7556.
And we are still naked. By this time, it's morning, and they take us to a place where there are showers. At that point, nobody feared showers. I also want to tell you one thing which I do remember. When I was pushed out or grabbed out from the train, there was a terrible, all right, I wanted to, instead of water, I wanted to drink the air because my throat was dry. And I almost vomited because the air stunk. I didn't know why. I found out later.